Hello, friends! You voted, and out of the 3 exclusive videos, the one you were most curious to see was a rare interview with Putin's ex-wife, Lyudmila. My job was simple: ask you, and also ask my amazing Patreon supporters for permission. And they were genuinely kind enough to say yes and let me make this video public. Huge thanks to them for the support. If you'd like, and you're able to support me too, you're welcome to join our big Patreon family. And now, enjoy the video.
In 2002, the second book by Izvestia journalist Oleg Blotsky appeared on the shelves of bookstores about the young president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, The Road to Power. At the Kremlin's request, Blotsky conducted a series of interviews with Putin himself, his wife, Lyudmila, friends, neighbors, and colleagues. He collected everything, organized it, and published it. It is a rather laudatory book in which all the participants speak of Putin as a good guy, a professional in his field, and simply a decent person. Everyone except Lyudmila Alexandrovna. The book, with a circulation of 20,000 copies, was released, but soon hurriedly withdrawn from sale. Electronic copies were wiped from the internet. Today, those who wish to buy and read it can only be satisfied with small excerpts. You can try it yourself. You will not find the full text online, which in our technological age is a great rarity. So what exactly did Putin's former wife say that had to be hidden from Russians? Thanks to the YouTube community, the author of the channel, Ostry Ugol, managed to get this book in hand. Let's open it and read how it really was. Also note that the interview went through censorship multiple times. That is why you will hear Lyudmila addressing her husband countless times as Vladimir Vladimirovich. In some places, the facts do not coincide with his real biography. However, the overall message from Putin's former wife about what this man truly represents and why everything happening today is no accident, but a natural outcome, can still be read clearly if you pay attention. And so, it all began back in 1980 in Leningrad.
I met Vladimir Vladimirovich in March 1980. At that time, he was 27 years old and I was 22. Together with my friend Galina, I flew from Kaliningrad to Leningrad for 3 days. It was she who insisted on this trip. To be honest, I never really liked traveling, and it took Galina a lot of effort to persuade me. Before that, I had never gone anywhere except for work. Galina and I both worked for Aeroflot. I preferred staying at home, and here I was, going on a trip. So we flew to Leningrad for 3 days, from March 7th to 9th. We arrived in the morning and were settled in a hotel located on Vastanya Square. Probably because the tours were very cheap, we got a huge room. There were about 15 of us from Kaliningrad, and we all stayed in that one room, or rather, just came there to sleep. I remember that we had just arrived, checked into the hotel, and immediately went on some excursion. There, our guide mentioned, by the way, that at the moment the most popular show in Leningrad was Rykin's Performance, and in second place was the music hall. But of course, you won't get into them, she confidently added. Galina and I exchanged glances and told ourselves, that's exactly where we'll go, to Rykin. We were persistent girls, and sneaking into a concert or theater was never much of a problem for us. A friend of Galina's from Leningrad, Alexei, offered to get tickets, and he kept his word, but with the help of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. It was he who got the tickets for the performance, and that is why Alexei invited Vladimir Vladimirovich to go with us. That is how we met. By the way, Alexei fibbed at that moment, telling his friend that he had known us for a long time. He saw me for the first time, and although he did know Galina, it had not been for as long as he claimed. However, if not for this little trick, the meeting and acquaintance with Vladimir Putin would hardly have happened. Considering his place of work, he would have certainly helped with tickets, but he would not have gone to the performance. Thus, under these circumstances, on the evening of March 7th, we met Vladimir Vladimirovich on the steps of the theater box office, and the four of us went to the Lensovet Theater. During the intermission, having become a bit bolder, we asked Vladimir Vladimirovich, maybe you could also help us get tickets to the music hall? And so the next evening, we were already at the music hall concert. Then we met again on the day of my departure. Galina went to visit a relative who lived in Leningrad, and we agreed to meet later at the airport. When I was leaving the hotel, Vladimir Vladimirovich came with Alexei to the Vostania Square metro station to see me off. That picture is still vividly before my eyes. We found ourselves in the metro, then stepped aside with Vladimir Vladimirovich, and he began to say goodbye to me. I wanted to ask for his phone number or address, but of course I didn't. And suddenly, Vladimir Vladimirovich gave me his phone number himself. Apparently, I was looking at him with such eyes that one could read only a single question in them. So are we really parting like this? At that moment, I noticed Alexei's eyes widen. He was standing modestly to the side. Later, Vladimir Vladimirovich told me that his friend had been terribly surprised and commented, "Have you lost your mind?" Alexei knew that Vladimir Vladimirovich never gave his phone number to people he barely knew. Now I understand that every action my husband takes is deliberate, and I don't think that at that moment he acted on impulse. Our further meetings went as follows. I would call him and fly to see him. I never planned any cultural program, relying entirely on Vladimir Vladimirovich's opinion. Back then, he was still simply Volodya. But to be honest, I absolutely don't remember where we went. I didn't even notice the streets when we were together. However, I clearly remember the first meeting with Vladimir Vladimirovich's parents. During one of my visits, he invited me to his place in the evening. He had just bought the most fashionable stereo system of that time, Russia, and on that occasion invited me and two of his friends over. His parents were at home, but we sat in Vladimir Vladimirovich's room and didn't bother them, just as they didn't bother us. We drank wine and tea, talked about everything, and listened to music, testing, so to speak, the new stereo system. Then, I remember, I went out to the kitchen where Vladimir Vladimirovich's mother, Maria Ivanovna, was, and then the same Alexei came into the kitchen and asked Maria Ivanovna, "What do you think of Luda?" She replied, "Yes, of course she's fine, but he already had a Luda, a good girl," and went on in the same spirit. At that moment, I almost burst into tears. I understood perfectly well that Maria Ivanovna said that because she had known that other Luda for many years and had hoped she would become her son's wife. So it was probably unpleasant for her that another Luda had appeared. Still, I also understood that Maria Ivanovna's attitude would have been the same toward any girl who appeared in place of the previous Luda. I won't deny it, I felt very hurt and upset then. But I never mixed, for example, a son's opinion with that of his parents. In that sense, I've always had a very clear point of view. Mother and father are one thing, and children are another, especially grown children who have the right to their own lives. They must make decisions independently and take full responsibility for them. As for me, I have always been very independent. Perhaps because in my parents' house I always had many different responsibilities. In addition, I had a younger sister, 8 years younger than me. So even at that time, I made my own decisions, and I treated others the same way. I repeat, I never mixed, for example, a son's opinion with that of his parents. Our relationship with Vladimir Vladimirovich developed quite steadily. Perhaps it wasn't always bright and joyful, but it was stable. There was a strange pattern to it. For 2 months, everything was fine, then some negativity or misunderstanding appeared, and then everything became good again. Speaking of feelings, it wasn't some fleeting passion or love at first sight. You know how it happens. You meet a person and instantly fall in love. That didn't happen. For the first time in my life, I gradually grew to love someone. Gradually, I got used to him and then loved him.
In my opinion, it is women who choose men. Why did I choose Vladimir Vladimirovich? It's not an easy question to answer unambiguously. First of all, you choose a person because you love him, and only later come many other reasons and details. At that moment, it was absolutely clear to me that life with Vladimir Vladimirovich would be completely different from the life I had lived before. The young men I had known previously could not compare with my new acquaintance. Vladimir Vladimirovich had a truly masculine character. At the same time, he was a very kind person who lived by Christian principles. Perhaps at that time, I didn't define these qualities in such terms, Christian principles, but they were certainly felt, not only by me, but also by those around him. Vladimir Vladimirovich was very friendly. He had a good sense of humor and was cheerful in conversation, which of course made his interactions with people easy, but not frivolous. At the same time, he approached his work and his relationships with people he befriended or maintained contact with great inner responsibility. But most importantly, as a woman, I had a sense that Vladimir Vladimirovich was a very reliable person. After meeting him, I felt this reliability, which grew stronger whenever I was near him. I remember once even telling him about it. We were sitting in a small restaurant in the Peter and Paul Fortress, and suddenly I felt that the man beside me was someone who would always make the right decision in life. The feeling was so strong that I immediately told Volodya about it. Both then and later, it became clear to me that with him, one could build a life together without fear of consequences. I think this is very important for any woman, because when a woman finds herself next to someone she doubts, such thoughts make life together very difficult. Who was the leader between us? I think there are two kinds of female leaders. The first are those who definitely want to be leaders and simply cannot imagine themselves otherwise. The second, as I call them, are accidental leaders, leaders by circumstance, who became such more because of upbringing or life's conditions than out of strong personal desire. I belong to the second category. And for me, leadership has never been a goal in itself. If I see that leadership can be passed on to another person, I do so calmly. But I also believe that justice must prevail in any relationship. If in your interactions with someone, you are not the leader, but on top of that, you are treated unfairly, for me, that situation is unacceptable. We met with Vladimir Vladimirovich in March, and by summer, when I came to Leningrad to apply to the university and spent quite a lot of time with my future husband, I finally realized that he was the man I truly needed. In July 1980, that feeling of his exceptional reliability, both as a man and as a person, became firmly rooted in me. I wasn't looking to make any new acquaintances in Leningrad. After all, I came not only to apply to Leningrad University, but also to see him. I had no desire to meet anyone else, although I won't deny young men did approach me on the street, but I didn't need anyone else. If I already had someone I loved, why would I need another? In this, Volodya and I were absolutely alike in our principles. Our dates were a story of their own. I was never late for them, while Vladimir Vladimirovich was always an hour and a half late. It was simply normal. Yet, knowing this, I still couldn't bring myself to arrive late. What if I would think this time he actually comes on time? I must say, I've never come to terms with his lateness to this very day. I remember standing in the metro, the first 15 minutes of waiting, fine, half an hour, still okay, but when an hour passed and he still wasn't there, you just started crying out of frustration. And after an hour and a half, there were no emotions left at all. What's strange is that, although it happened constantly, each time felt as if it were the first. To this day, I can't understand why I never brought a book with me. I could have just read while waiting for Vladimir Vladimirovich, but I never did. From date to date, day after day, it was always the same. Yet every time I hoped that this delay would surely be the last. I understood that he didn't do it intentionally. That's just how circumstances turned out. When Vladimir Vladimirovich finally appeared, I never argued with him. After an hour and a half of waiting, you experience so much that there's no energy left for emotions. So yes, Vladimir Vladimirovich wore me down, completely. His lateness was always explained by work, where incidentally, he was very punctual. In his personal life, he relaxed, and really, where else could he? I think that people up to about 35 still hold illusions about their future family life. We tend to think that if there's something we don't like about a person, but we really want to be together, we'll surely adjust them a little, maybe re-educate them, and that time itself will smooth things out. And that's where we are wrong. The realization that you can't change a fully formed person usually comes only by the age of 35 or 40. I think both Vladimir Vladimirovich and I had such illusions about each other. We were no exception to that rule. But to give Vladimir Vladimirovich his due, he was always exactly who he was. He never lied to himself or pretended to be someone he wasn't. He never flaunted his behavior, his principles, or the fact that he was like that. He simply was, and that was all. Vladimir Vladimirovich never talked about it, but I understood that he was the way he was and would never be any different. That kind of behavior, I must say, was honest. To be honest, cities rarely attract me. It's people who do. The only exception, perhaps, is Moscow. When I first came to the capital, I immediately liked the city, but that was, I repeat, an exception to the rule. It's people who draw me in. I focus on them, not on where they live. Leningrad always felt foreign to me. Maybe only in the last 2 years before our move to Moscow did I begin to find some common ground with the city. St. Petersburg is, generally speaking, a difficult city, cold and distant. And in such cases, I always follow the lead of the relationship. If it doesn't accept me, I won't impose myself. But back in the 1980s, I simply worshipped Leningrad. I fell in love with it at first sight. For all those 11 years I lived there, I was sure I adored it. And later, after moving to Moscow, I realized that it had been more like an illness. When you fall sick with a city, a book you've read, a film you've seen, or a person. Since I was born in the provinces, I absorbed the way people related to each other there. In Kaliningrad, it felt unpleasant to shut yourself off from friends and acquaintances around you. A provincial city lives more openly, more with its heart on the sleeve than large cities do. So for me, communication always meant kind, sincere, and open human relations. In Petersburg, however, people show others only what they choose to show, emphasizing by their entire demeanor that everything else is off limits. I think the climate also naturally influences people's character and how they perceive the world around them. After all, Petersburg is quite a gloomy city, and if a person tends toward pessimism, there he will surely become a pessimist. As for my husband, I think Leningrad left its mark on Vladimir Vladimirovich, as it does on anyone who grows up there. Still, he had a certain reserve, a kind of closed nature, which, by the way, was also characteristic of his parents. But I repeat, at that time, I absolutely adored Leningrad, especially since the man I loved lived there. I would visit him several times a month, taking about 4 days off work and flying over. In the summer of 1980, I came to Leningrad to apply to the university, which was quite bold on my part considering I had finished school 4 years earlier and, of course, remembered little of the program. But I thought, why not take the risk? Maybe it'll work. Back then, my work experience was taken into account during admission. Besides, I had already studied for 2.5 years at a technical institute, but realized it wasn't for me. So the idea of entering a university appeared. I don't even remember why I chose the humanities, probably as an alternative to the technical field I didn't like. I initially planned to apply to the Russian department of the Kaliningrad University, but after meeting Vladimir Vladimirovich, I thought, why not try in Leningrad? That meeting and the birth of a great feeling that followed pushed me toward choosing another place of study. Yes, I fell in love and wanted to be near him. After all, long relationships, especially those still taking shape, rarely survive at a distance. I arrived 3 weeks before the first exam to apply to the Russian Department of the Faculty of Philology. I wrote the essay and got a 4 out of 5. Also received a 4 in German, though I had barely prepared for the exams. But in history, I got a failing grade, a 2. Unlike Vladimir Vladimirovich, I was never particularly good at history. But the fact that I was deliberately failed, that's undeniable. I clearly remember answering everything according to the exam ticket, and then the examiner suddenly asked an additional question in a rather sharp and harsh manner. If he hadn't done that, I probably would have gotten a 4. I remember walking out of the room in tears. It wasn't just the failing grade that upset me, it was also his tone and behavior. Though even then, I perfectly understood if I knew history as well as Vladimir Vladimirovich did, no one could have failed me. I spent another week in Leningrad. Once we went to a party where I behaved perhaps too freely, dancing, laughing, having fun. Vladimir Vladimirovich clearly didn't like it, and he told me quite firmly that our relationship couldn't continue. At that moment, I understood. I had to leave. I didn't even argue because everything was said very decisively. I've always been the kind of person who understands the weight of a word. I wasn't offended. I had been treated honestly, told everything directly. I left and didn't call Leningrad. It wasn't out of pride. I simply knew the relationship was over. I went back to work and spent 2 weeks in a terrible mood. You go to work, do things around the house, but don't notice anything around you. I couldn't talk to anyone. There was only one thought in my head. I must get through this, endure it, survive it. It was very, very hard. And then, 2 weeks later, I came home, and I even had this strange feeling that something wonderful was about to happen. And on my door, there was a small note pinned. "Yes, darling, it's me," and a phone number. That short message was from Volodya, who had come on a one-day business trip. I don't know if he planned it deliberately. Later, Vladimir Vladimirovich said that the trip had happened by chance, and he hadn't arranged anything intentionally. But since he was there, why not stop by? He had arrived the day before, while I had just returned from a flight early that morning. So we met at noon at the Hotel Kaliningrad where he was staying. I remember crying when we met, confessing my love and saying that I needed him very much. Then I went with him to the airport. His plane was leaving at 5 in the evening. But our relationship was still undefined. Probably it was there, at the airport, just minutes before his flight, that Vladimir Vladimirovich made the decision, whether to continue or end things between us. The conversation happened right before takeoff, and it seems that at that moment, he decided to continue our relationship. If Vladimir Vladimirovich hadn't come to Kaliningrad, hadn't found me, and we hadn't clarified our relationship once and for all, I would never have gone to study in Leningrad. I would, of course, have applied to our local university. At the end of October 1980, after an interview, I was admitted to the Rabfac,
Workers' Faculty, a preparatory department for university entrance from the workforce at Leningrad University.
Incidentally, that was the last or second to last year this faculty operated. It was later abolished.
The Rabfac had one advantage. After completing it, students were automatically admitted to the department of their choice, though not to everyone. For instance, getting into the German department was extremely difficult. Vladimir Vladimirovich helped me rent a room in a communal apartment where 2 families lived, a husband, wife, and their 10-year-old son, who had 2 rooms, and a woman whose son was serving in the army, who rented me her room for 30 rubles a month. I can't say I've fully experienced the life of a typical Leningrad communal apartment. The people there were decent, never quarreling. Of course, I had heard stories about terrible communal flats, but ours had nothing in common with those. The two families lived side by side, observing all the norms of civility and coexistence. In that sense, I was lucky. At the Rabfak, the stipend was 40 rubles, clearly not enough. Vladimir Vladimirovich also helped me find a job. Almost immediately, I got a position at one of the institutes as an operator of an electronic computing machine, earning 140 rubles. Together with my stipend, minus rent, I had about 150 rubles a month, enough to live quite comfortably at the time. In 1981, I finished the Rabfak, passing the exams that also served as entrance tests for the first year of university. Yes, that was indeed the final year of the Rabfak's existence. It was closed afterward. That's how I became a student at Leningrad University. But to be honest, what I wanted most of all was simply to be with Volodya, to build a family.
It is absolutely true that throughout our life together, Vladimir Vladimirovich was testing me. I always had the feeling that he was constantly watching me, what decision I would make, the right one or not, and whether I would withstand this or that trial. I remember that around 1981, we took up downhill skiing. Very few people were into it at an amateur level back then. When we met, I didn't know whether Vladimir Vladimirovich had skied before or not. At some point, he just suddenly suggested we start. In fact, he didn't even suggest. He didn't ask my opinion. For Vladimir Vladimirovich, it went without saying that we would start skiing. We bought Polish skis with a wooden inlay inside and Alpina boots. Ski suits were hard to come by and expensive, so we managed without them. To be frank, we looked awful. We skied in Kovgolovo. Now, after all these years, such a trip seems incredible. Vladimir Vladimirovich lived in Avtovo, and to get to Kovgolovo, you had to take several connections. A tram, then the metro, then a commuter train. It took about an hour and a half from home to the base. I remember how cold it was. While you were moving, fine. Then you'd freeze. We took sandwiches and tea in a thermos. On the one hand, there was the satisfaction of skiing. On the way back, on the train, we froze again and only wanted to get home faster. In that sense, it was a tough time. Yet every Saturday and Sunday, we went to Kovgolovo. We didn't have an instructor. We taught ourselves. You step on the skis and go, as best you can. The gear was expensive, skis, boots, and so on. From then on, all our money started going into this hobby. Sometimes there wasn't even enough left for theater tickets. But sports always had a special place in Vladimir Vladimirovich's life. He was always doing something athletic, except for a brief period in Dresden. I remember in the summer, at the dacha in Tosno, we would get up in the morning, run to the river, and swim in the cold water before going to work. Vladimir Vladimirovich always had a car. When we met, a Zaporozhets. I remember a time when the car didn't have a muffler, and at 1:30 in the night, we drove around Leningrad without it. Apparently, he really wanted to show me the city at night, and probably to show off his own car, which was extremely prestigious at the time. Even then, Vladimir Vladimirovich was a very eligible young man. From my point of view, the muffler episode seemed pointless. Imagine, I arrive for only 4 days and just want to be with Volodya, to talk. I couldn't have cared less whether there was a Zaporozhets or not. But he clearly wanted to take me for a drive, and so he spent the whole day looking for that wretched muffler. I, meanwhile, spent that whole time in the hotel. It was terribly upsetting to waste 1 day out of 4
only to end up driving around the night city in a car without a muffler. Later, the Zaporozhets, together with the garage, was sold, and with that money he bought another car, a Zhiguli 4. We drove it on our honeymoon with friends, Sasha and his wife, who also had a car. That's when I was amazed to discover that in a group, Vladimir Vladimirovich never claimed the palm of leadership. He ceded that role to the more active person. Sasha was exactly that type. He planned our days, and Vladimir Vladimirovich willingly followed along. Probably thanks to that, we spent that month without the slightest hint of a quarrel, very calmly and amicably. Which, you'll agree, is quite unusual when 4 people are together for a long time, especially on the road. It took us a long time to reach the sea, stopping in various cities along the way. In the travel cooler, we kept sandwiches because back then it was hard to find sausage, ham, or other products in unfamiliar places. I remember we stopped for the night, and Sasha said,
"Up at 6 in the morning, departure at 7, before the road gets busy."
Sasha's wife was named Irina, and I exchanged glances. How awful, getting up at 6? Like it or not, up at 6 sharp, and at 7, like perfect little pioneers, into the cars and off we go. Before that, Irina and I asked Sasha, "Can we make a stop?" He answered,
"Only in 5 hours."
We asked again, "What if we really need to stop?"
"Only in 5 hours, we're keeping our pace."
And that's how we drove. By the way, with the same friends, a year earlier, we flew to Sochi for a vacation. It was truly an amazing story. Do you know where we stayed? In the security housing at Brezhnev's residence near Bocharoruchi. That building still exists. At the time, Brezhnev's dacha was located there. We got in through connections and lived in the guards' dormitory, a 2-room apartment, 1 room for our acquaintances and 1 room for us. We ate in the security canteen. The food was good, the portions large, and very cheap. As fate would have it, many years later, we found ourselves back at Bocharoruchi again. Back then, we never imagined that the grounds we looked at from the balcony and sunbathed beside on the beach, without going inside, of course, would one day become the place of our future vacations. We couldn't imagine that someday we would end up on the other side of that guarded area. Even then, there was a tennis court. It's still in use today. I remember how we played tennis together. Strictly speaking, the word played doesn't quite fit me, though even then I could at least hit the ball. Vladimir, however, knew how to play. As for the Black Sea, our first trip there together was to Sudak in the summer of 1981. It was our first joint trip, and it lasted 2 weeks. For me, it was my first trip to the Black Sea ever. In July 1981, we went by train to Sudak with 2 of Vladimir Vladimirovich's friends. Vladak and Victor rented a separate room, and we stayed in the back room of a small apartment. I remember I cooked there because Vladimir Vladimirovich flatly refused to eat in public canteens. Stores were nearly empty then, so we had to buy food at the market where prices were rather high. We had to be clever to buy things without spending too much. I cooked for the 2 of us, but the guys would drop in from time to time. The landlady was terribly displeased, since rooms in apartments were usually rented out without kitchen privileges. It was a 2-room apartment with a walk-through room, and the woman clearly showed a muted irritation that I was cooking. She even pinched me in front of Vladimir Vladimirovich once. She said, "Luda, you've got something spoiled on the windowsill," in a very wheedling, falsely concerned voice. I still remember that phrase. For the trip, Vladimir Vladimirovich brought a spear gun, fins, a mask, and an inflatable mattress. The sea was far from the house, about a half-an-hour walk. I remember there was a small peninsula there. It was hard to get to from the shore, especially with a spear gun. It was easier to swim. And at that time, I could barely stay afloat, and that with great effort. I only learned to swim later.
So on that mattress, risking my life, essentially, I crossed over to that little island while Vladimir swam alongside. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, and there was nowhere to hide, just stones all around. I got badly sunburned. Later, the skin on my shoulders simply peeled off. And Vladimir sat underwater with the spear gun for more than an hour until he was numb with cold. He kept trying to shoot a fish, and then suddenly he surfaced, thrilled, with a shaft in his hand and a small fish, about 20 centimeters long, wriggling on it. Such a triumphant look on his face. Underwater, of course, fish look nearly twice as big as they really are. Later, I made fish soup out of that catch. I don't even remember how it happened that I swam back alone. Most likely, he went along the shore, and I was afraid because there was a very narrow passage along the rock. Apparently, I said I'd swim across. Vladimir handed me the spear gun and asked, "Will you make it?" In the water, the spear gun seemed light to me. "Yes," I answered. But once I started swimming, holding it above my head, I realized with horror that it was very heavy and I might not make it. Panic seized me so much that I don't even remember how I managed to reach the shore. Later, I couldn't understand how I got there at all.
So there were always situations that didn't allow me to relax. There was always something to struggle with. The skis, the mountains, the water.
I got married 3.5 years after we met, on July 28, 1983. By the way, in all the years since, we have never once celebrated our wedding anniversary. When we first met and started seeing each other, there was no point in starting a family. It was clear that ahead of us were 5 years of study, and children in such circumstances were simply impossible. For 1.5 years, I lived in a communal apartment. Then, before the landlady's son returned from the army, I moved into a dormitory. To be honest, it was a pity to pay 30 rubles every month for a room. Vladimir Vladimirovich lived with his parents, who probably never fully accepted me, although outwardly all the politeness was observed. So on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, I usually stayed at his place. Our relationship lasted quite a long time, and although I never hinted at marriage, we both understood perfectly well that sooner or later we would have to decide, either to end things or to move forward. But Vladimir Vladimirovich would never tolerate it if a woman started to pressure him, hint, or lead the conversation toward marriage. Even if such a topic came up by chance, he would immediately shut it down. He treated such discussions with irony and believed that the decision should always come from the man. On the other hand, marriage was never discussed in my own family either. My mother never brought it up. In that sense, ours was quite an unusual family, since, as a rule, girls are taught from an early age that their main goal in life is to get married. In our home, there were no such talks. It was Vladimir Vladimirovich who became the initiator of the wedding. I think he carefully weighed his decision before telling me. 3 months before the wedding, Vladimir Vladimirovich proposed to me properly, in a classic way. He confessed his love and suggested setting the wedding date for July. Everything was done very formally, even a bit ceremoniously. I remember how it happened. We were sitting in Volodya's room, and suddenly he said, "Well, my dear, you know my character. It's quite difficult, and now I think you should probably make a decision about your life." Inside, I froze. When he began the conversation that way, I thought he wanted to end our relationship. But even at that moment, I answered honestly. I said, "You know, I've made my mind. I need you." Then Volodya said, "Well, in that case, I propose you marry me. I love you.
"Will you say yes?" I said, "Yes, I will." He added, "If you don't mind, let's have our wedding on July 28th, 3 months from now." So, at the end of April, we declared our love. The wedding ceremony, Volodya's suit, and my dress, we organized everything with our own money. Neither his nor my parents helped us financially. The only thing my parents did was replace a gift with money. While preparing for the wedding, we decided that it should take place over 2 days. Not because we wanted a lavish celebration, but because we thought it would be nice to gather our parents, friends, and Vladimir Vladimirovich's colleagues separately. So the first day we spent with family and friends, and the second with his coworkers. The first day of the wedding took place at the restaurant Poplavek, located right behind the Lieutenant Schmidt Bridge. About 20 people gathered there, roughly the same number as on the following evening. On the second day, some of the guests continued celebrating at home, while we were at the restaurant of the Moscow Hotel, where Vladimir Vladimirovich's colleagues had gathered. When you talk about such distant events, it's hard to recall every detail, but whenever you look back, what resurfaces is not specific details, but the general feeling, an emotion that captures your attitude toward that time. From the first day, what remained in my memory was a sense of warmth and goodwill. It was such a happy time. I don't even remember if people shouted, "Kiss, kiss!" Probably they did, as was customary. I don't remember our kisses, but I remember that feeling of kindness, warmth, and light very clearly. The second day was more formal. It was also joyful and pleasant, but in a slightly different way. Then we went on our honeymoon. By car, we drove to Kiev, where I think we met friends from Moscow who were also traveling by car. I remember we went on excursions together. I think we even went to the theater. Unfortunately, no photographs have survived. We had a camera and black and white film, and I even took some pictures, though I didn't really know how. Later, those undeveloped rolls just lay around at home, and eventually we threw them away. So our honeymoon remained without photos. We stayed in Kiev for about 3 days, then drove through Ukraine, Moldova, passing through Chisinau, and then back into Ukraine again. I remember that about 80 kilometers before Mykolaiv, our radiator overheated, and for the rest of the trip, a friend had to tow us with a rope barely 1.5 meters long, all tied up in knots. We reached Mykolaiv, and the men spent the whole night fixing the problem. After that, we went on, reached Yalta, and stayed in a mountain camping site that belonged to the Yalta Hotel. Each family had its own room. In the mornings, we would drive down to the hotel's beach. We stayed there for 12 days, and since we spent about 15 days traveling to Yalta, stopping along the way to see the cities, the whole trip lasted quite a long time. I remember we spent 2 days in Lviv, and on the way back from Yalta, we passed through Moscow because Vladimir Vladimirovich had some business there. While he attended to it, I stayed with our travel companions. That's how our honeymoon went. We lived with his parents, but that didn't bother me because I always feel at home wherever I am, even when I'm a guest. I came into his home and felt myself the mistress of my own family. Yes, of course, we were 2 separate families, not one, but it didn't stop us from living peacefully under the same roof. What I remember the most was our first year of marriage. It was wonderful and romantic. Vladimir Vladimirovich would hurry home from work, and I would wait for him by the window, getting anxious if he was late. Life then was tender and filled with affection. My idea of family life, of how 2 loving people should live together, was of course idealistic. I believed that they would share interests, talk about their work, give each other advice, run the household together, raise children, and spend free time as a family. That was how I imagined married life, as mutual understanding and harmony. When we were dating, I never thought that we would not discuss his work at all. Only much later did I realize that, in principle, it was impossible to talk about his work. But even so, I never truly made peace with that fact. After all, people don't change, and my ideas about family life have not changed to this day.
It was very difficult for me to accept that my husband never told me anything about his work. I felt that a woman should share and empathize, but that was clearly not the case here. I accepted the situation as it was. Of course, at first, I tried to insist on my own views, but it never worked. Vladimir Vladimirovich never, under any circumstances, spoke about his job. Whenever I asked my usual question, "So how was your day? What did you do?" he would always joke in the same way. "We cop them before lunch, release them after, that's it." By the way, Vladimir Vladimirovich never told me that he was an officer of the KGB. When we met, he said he worked in the Criminal Investigation Department, and I believed that for a year and a half. Only later, when I was working at a computer center and had a friend there, the wife of one of his acquaintances, did I find out from her that he actually worked for the KGB. I remember we were in the office. My friend was sitting at the desk, and I was standing across from her. Suddenly, she said, "You know, Luda, I think Volodya doesn't work in criminal investigation after all." Then she told me that Vladimir Vladimirovich was an officer of the Committee for State Security. I think she said it on his behalf. After all, he had to find some way to reveal the truth, and perhaps this was the method he chose. Though that's only my assumption. I still don't know for sure. After hearing that, I didn't feel good at all. It was upsetting that he hadn't told me the truth about his work. If he had told me 6 months in, that would have been fine. But after a year and a half, when I already hoped our relationship was getting stronger, it felt like a signal that he still didn't fully trust me. I think after that conversation, I asked him directly if it was true, and he said yes, it is, though I can't remember the details anymore. As for the background check, since a KGB officer deciding to get married would surely have to undergo one, perhaps it was done, but if so, I never felt it. Still, one particular incident I remember vividly to this day. We'd agreed that I would call him at 7 in the evening. There was no phone in my communal apartment on Vasilyevsky Island, so I went to use a payphone. For an hour and a half, I tried calling, but he didn't answer. He didn't get home until 8:30. It was already dark, and as I was walking back after yet another unsuccessful call, I suddenly noticed a young man running behind me. The street was empty, and I had to go through an archway that led into a courtyard and from there into the entrance of the building. At first, the young man was walking quickly. I sped up too. He walked faster, so did I. He started running, and I ran. Then he shouted, "Miss, wait, I won't do anything bad. I just want to talk. 2 seconds, please." He sounded genuinely sincere, speaking straight from the heart. I stopped. He ran up to me and said, "Miss, it's fate. I so wanted to meet you." "What do you mean, fate?" I replied. "Please, I'm begging you. Give me your phone number." "I don't have a phone." "Then write down mine." "I won't. I'm sorry, but this isn't fate." "Well, maybe you'll change your mind. Write it down just in case." "There's no just in case," I said, and walked away. At the time, it never crossed my mind that this could have been some kind of test. But later, when I learned that Vladimir Vladimirovich worked for the KGB, I remembered that night. I asked him about it many times afterward, but he always avoided answering. So to this day, I don't know whether it was a check or just a random man trying to flirt with me.
I never thought it was immoral to test people in such situations. After all, they had to somehow find out about a person's moral principles. Who knows? Maybe after marriage, I would have started chatting with strangers on the street. Still, at the time, I didn't think about any of that. It didn't matter to me whether I was being tested or not. Let them test me. The only people who are afraid are those who have something to hide. I was completely open and honest. I had nothing to fear. I was never angry about Vladimir Vladimirovich's work. Work is work. It's foolish to be angry at something impersonal or at his superiors for giving him urgent tasks. I certainly never blamed them. I understood perfectly well that it wasn't his bosses keeping him late, it was him. But still, sometimes it was frustrating and confusing. For example, he could say he'd be home by 9 in the evening and then not show up. That was bad enough, but worse was that he never called to say he'd be late. And I had my own plans too. Maybe not that important, but still, they existed. If my husband said he'd be home by 9, but came back at midnight, I couldn't sit still for those 3 hours. I waited. And there's nothing more torturous than waiting. I waited, worried, thought about him, got angry, then upset, then sad. I went through a whole range of emotions. And through our years together, I never learned to distract myself while waiting for him. All I ever did was wait. I simply didn't know how to do otherwise. For me, a word means something. If Vladimir Vladimirovich said he'd be home at 9, then I expected him at 9. His work at the KGB left its mark on me, at least for a while. It was hard during that period not to speak openly with people. I'm a person of a different kind. It's easier for me to talk honestly than to constantly think about what I can or cannot say. Though I've never been overly social, I've always had few friends and acquaintances. It was that unspoken ban itself that truly weighed me down.
Friends, let's discuss this video in the comments. Share your thoughts and guesses. What do you think frightened Putin so much that he urgently ordered all these books to be pulled from sale? I'll never stop saying how much I appreciate having you here. Thanks to your support on Patreon, this channel continues to exist, a place where we can still speak openly. Please share this video with your friends. The truth deserves to be seen. Special thanks to everyone supporting me through Buy Me a Coffee. Every dollar you spend goes directly into creating more content. Thank you all. I'm not saying goodbye. See you soon.